Am I back, guys? Yeah, umlingi agapes. Somebody please say hi to me from... You, my siblings, umlingi agapes. I take it I'm back on now because I see there's certain people who are watching. Okay, thank you. No, andiphelelwanga idatha, my love. Ivele yacima lento. I don't know what happened. I just went off. I'm sorry, guys, about that. So another important question that one needs to address before drafting a will is whether or not the person is married. Your marital status is very important. You need to understand also the consequences of your matrimonial regime, which is the choice of marriage that you have chosen to get married in terms of. So you need to understand if you're married in terms of civil law, if you're married in terms of customary law, if you're married in terms of a civil union act for partners in same-sex relationships, or whether you are in a religious marriage. I'll unpack those when we get to them a little bit later. And obviously it's also important to understand the position of your heirs. You need to understand whether your heirs are minors in the present, because you must always make your will in such a way that should you die tomorrow or today, what is going to happen. I'm going to get to intestate succession now, and I'm trying to rush now so that I don't get cut off before I finish. Yeah, so you should understand the position of your heirs. You should understand if there's minors, for instance, because you might want to create a trust for them. You must understand if there's prodigals or insolvent people, because you might also want to put certain provisions to protect that they do not misuse their inheritance. For a will to be valid, there's only 2 or 3 requirements. It must be in writing. The testator must write. It need not be handwritten, it can be printed, but it must be printed on some form of media, and it must be signed by the testator. The law actually just makes provision for the testator to sign personally on the will, or for somebody to sign on their behalf. If you can sign using a full signature, what we ordinarily know to be a full signature. If you are not able to write, then you can make use of a mark or a thumbprint. But there are additional formalities. If you use a thumbprint or a mark, then you'll have to also get a commissioner of oaths who will have to attest to the fact that you did in fact write the will and the contents are what you had instructed the person that wrote on your behalf to write. And then one last thing, you also have to get witnesses to sign your will. Much to be appreciated is the fact that the witnesses do not sign to confirm the contents of the will. They sign to confirm that the will is indeed as per the wishes of the testator. So when a witness is called to court, they will never be asked with regard to the contents of the will, but they'll be asked as to whether the will is in fact in accordance with the wishes of the testator. The testator signs at the end. The law just requires the testator to sign at the end of the will, but in practice you find that on each page the testator also signs, and at the end of the will, which is where the wording ends, not at the end of the page, to avoid fraud. And then the witnesses only sign at the end, but usually they also initial other pages. So like I said, if you're using a mark to sign your will, you have to get a commissioner of oaths who will attest to the fact that it was indeed your wishes, and they were witnesses who can confirm that the will is indeed according to your wishes. And then the commissioner will then have to make what we call a certificate, which will at all times be together with your will. And that is how you would then administer a deceased estate, which is testate. So now let's come to the intestate succession part of the work, which is also very, very a little bit tricky, but once you understand it, it sort of makes sense. There are two things that I need to explain before we deal with intestate succession. One is the concept of a spouse. A spouse, in terms of Intestate Succession Act, can be one of 5 things. Please check your category and make sure that you are a spouse, because you have to be one of the 5 for you to be a spouse and benefit in accordance with intestate succession as a spouse. Intestate succession, I already explained, is the succession part where the person does not have a will, or the will was made but it has been declared invalid by a court of law, or it has been rejected because it doesn't comply with the formalities. So you then become intestate. The first thing that you need to know, as we are trying to explain now, is the issue of a spouse. A spouse is someone that's married to the person in terms of the Marriage Act, umfazi wephepha, as you would know, like many of us are. The second spouse is somebody married in terms of the Recognition of Customary Marriages Act. That is somebody who's been lobolared and taken to the homestead of the husband and received, etc., like the wife of HHP. That's a modern time example. And then we have what we call the seed-bearing woman. If somebody dies without children, usually, or the woman that the person is married to does not conceive, then they usually get a lady to come and conceive kids for that woman to raise, basically. That person is also considered to be a spouse in terms of Intestate Succession Act. And then we also have spouses of Muslim and Hindu marriages. The actual marriage is not valid in terms of the law, but the two partners are considered to be spouses to one another because they have a reciprocal duty of support towards one another. That just basically means when you are staying together in that kind of a situation, you have a duty towards one another to do things for one another. So you are given the protection of a spouse. And then importantly, we also have same-sex partners who are in a civil union. Important to note in this one, before December 2006, anybody that was in that relationship as a life partner could be covered as a spouse. But after December 2006, you would have to have had your marriage solemnized in order for you to be protected. That's simply because before 2006 it was not possible for same-sex partners to get married, and then after December 2006 it was now possible for them to get married. So if your partner didn't marry you whilst they're alive, you are not going to get the protection of the law upon their death. You have to make sure that they marry you now. But if the person had died before 2006, then you wouldn't have been able to get married. It was illegal for same-sex partners to get married. So the law will protect you if you can prove that you were a same-sex life partner of somebody. So now let's come to the individual benefits of intestate succession. The first situation that I want us to talk about is the situation where the deceased does not have descendants or children, but is survived by a spouse. So I am married and I don't have children. Who is going to benefit in terms of intestate succession? The law in that case says the entire estate will be given to my spouse because I don't have children. It's just me and my spouse. So the person that benefits is my spouse. Remember, we are only talking about 50% of your estate if you are married in community of property, or that portion that has accrued to you if you're married in community of property with out of community of property but with accrual, or nothing if you're married out of community of property without accrual, because there is no part of it that then belongs to you if you are in such a marriage. So the second instance would be where the deceased is survived by descendants and a spouse. So